Much, Molly, for that lovely introduction. Sorry, I got something here. Yeah, so today I'm going to be, I'm the director. I'm the director for the Office of Campus Research Development at Duke. And today I'm going to be presenting on the K99 opportunity. So the last time I spoke, if you actually attended, was on F32. So you might see some similarities in some of the slides. I will also have the kind of the comparison slide again up to remind postdocs some of the different, the pretty distinct differences between, whether or not you should apply to a K99 versus an F32 based on the stage of your career. I'm also going to say that I actually do this presentation like as a standard, as one of my standard presentations during the academic year. That is for an hour and a half. So what I've done here is I've curtailed it. And so there's some things that I normally present, I won't. And so I'm hoping that I can get through this content fast in 45 minutes. Okay, so it's not advancing. Let's see why. Okay, there we go. All right, so the learning objectives today is I'll do very quickly the purpose of K99, how it differs from the F32, considerations for finding mentors for K awards, some differences from the F32, but not much. And then we'll focus most of the presentation on the writing of the K99. So, again, just like the F32, you need to do your homework. If you don't know which institute center or IC you want to basically have in mind when you're writing this, you want to review the funding priorities, limitations. I'll be following up with a toolkit, and there is a link in there for IC contacts. And I would highly recommend going to that, not only to find who you would contact, but they also have some information about some priorities that they have, some limitations of things they're not interested in funding. So it's always good to go there just for that reason alone, okay? You wanna read the parent announcement, and there's three types, and I'll go into that, or there's RFAs. And you'll see some of the RFAs. I have a source, the general kind of the hub for the K99, and they have some RFAs like for NIAID or for the Brain Initiative, for example. Specific K99s for those institutes. You definitely, I highly recommend this all the time. And even when you when you go to presentations from NIH, I mean, they'll say it too, to basically contact the program officer to discuss your project. And when you do that, you want to provide a draft of your aims page.
Yes.
Draft of your aims page. Maybe if you can mute, please, that would be great on your end. Provide draft of your aims page. And then the other thing is Duke would prefer, and actually kind of requires, that you do not talk to the PO about any budget questions you have. You want to talk to your grants administrator about any budget. What you're talking to them is really making sure that your science and your training is compatible with what they want to fund. The eligibility is that you must not have more than 4 years of postdoctoral research experience before you can apply to a K99. And there is a notice out there that does provide an extension of eligibility. And so I highlighted what it is, but you can also go to the notice and read it yourself. So you have basically, I think it's something like an additional 8 months of eligibility, depending upon when you, when that 4-year cutoff happens. And let me just give you a sense of what mentored K awards are, because there's actually, and maybe, a mentor or two of yours have applied for these non-mentored K awards, okay? And they have a different number, but what I'm talking about are the mentored K awards. And here, mentored basically means that uh, uh, there you will have, and for the K99, it's 1 to 2 years. Uh, you will be mentored during that mentored phase to help you develop the necessary expertise. The career development part, it's part of the K award or the career development mechanisms, and there's several of them, but it's part of that K award mechanism. It's really focusing on less about your research. Well, it's partly about your research, your long-term research agenda, and then the specific objective for this K99. But really, they're looking at, you know, sort of an investment in you as an NIH researcher. And then the awards is also just focusing on the investment part. Some interchangeable terms, just so that we're all on the same page of terminology. Mentor equals sponsor. PI, I could say candidate or applicant. They all mean the same thing. So the K99 ROO versus R32, I already talked about the R32, but you know, the some things to highlight here is the no more than 4 years, but then you do have an extension because of COVID. You have up to 5 years. However, the K99 ROO is 5 years, but the mentoring part can only be 1 to 2 years. Okay, the mentoring cannot be more than 2 years. Citizenship is not a requirement. And I think a really big difference is, you know, whether or not this would be a good stage of your career is, you know, to ask yourself, do you need a lot of training, more than 2 years, or are you really nearly ready to be an independent researcher? That is, to basically take a faculty position somewhere and start developing your research program as a tenure track, most of the time tenure track faculty member. And so, you know, the whole purpose of the K99 when it came out is to sort of speed the transition to R01, because their data was showing that it took a long time for academics to actually get their first R01. It took, you know, many, many years. So the K99 was a way to sort of speed that up. Okay, so the K99 parent announcement, there's 3 different types, and what I have here on this slide is to give you a sense of what are the basically the differences in terms of determining which PA you need to respond to. Okay, so there's a clinical trial, there's a not clinical trial, and then there's a basic experimental studies. 3 different types of parent announcements. And so to determine which one would be best for you, you need to answer those questions, okay, to determine whether or not your study will be a clinical trial. And if you've answered no to any of them, you would basically use the parent announcement, no, not clinical trial, or something like that, no clinical trial, okay? Now, if you answered yes to all 4 of those questions, okay, basically, then it's really number 3 that you need to pay attention to. And so basic experimental studies, that came around because a lot of psych neuroscience studies might fit into that category more. So they're randomly assigning an intervention, but the intervention is studying more of a sort of, you know, a phenomenon instead of like a drug or a device. So that would be the main difference. And I have some sources there if you want to look at those in a little bit more detail. Here are the parent announcements. The number changes every single year. And so the toolkit that I have, you know, basically they have the correct parent program announcements. This just gives you idea of the success rate. This is the FY 2020 by institute, and it just gives you a sense of sort of the success rates by institute, and then the overall you see. Actually, these are some select ICs. I didn't include like the dentistry one and that sort of thing, so I recalculated this a little bit. So looking at these ones that might be most appropriate for Duke is it's almost 30% success rate overall. Okay, the deadlines that you need to know, there's three cycles. So new case,
over the course of the rest.
The new case are basically the 12th of February, June, October. Then the resubmissions will be a month after that. And then if you're doing anything that is HIV/AIDS related, they have their own deadlines. The K Award mentors are the sponsors, okay? So this will be similar if you went to the F32. But, basically your primary mentor, the person has to be, outstanding in the field you want to pursue. That is why, say if your primary mentor is more of an assistant professor and doesn't have, now, if the assistant professor has already a very good track record with NIH, it might be a very, very good, suitable primary mentor. But the main thing is that you want someone with a good track record. And this is where there might be the more differences with the F32. You typically you do not want this to be a current mentor of yours. However, this person, it's nice, and I've seen these in reviews. Reviewers like it when there is some demonstration of prior collaborations with you, right? So you may not have worked with them like in a mentor-mentee capacity, but you've had some prior collaborations. And I've seen reviewers, they really, really like that. They want this primary mentor to be extramurally funded, ideally like having R01s or higher advanced or more complex awards through NIH. But if it's not that, they want equivalent big funding, maybe big NSF awards or big DoD awards. So that's also something to think about. And this person needs to serve as a role model for you with respect to your long-term interests. Now, most of the time these days, you don't just have a primary mentor, you might have a mentoring team. And so any of your co-mentors, here are some things to think about, okay? The mentoring team collectively, each person should have a distinct role in your mentoring, and that should be very, very clear in your write-ups when it comes to your mentors, okay? Again, collaborating experience with you is very nice. Also having a record of successful mentoring, there's part of the statement that I'll talk later that they need to actually identify their record of successful mentoring, okay? They want to see that they have the time available for you, and everyone should encourage and support your path to independence. That should be demonstrated on paper. Here are some things to think about that early on you discuss your research and training plans with your primary mentor. They might help identify co-mentors if you don't have that all in place. I think that you should definitely show them drafts of your research plan, of what you're saying about your training. I think it's really, really important to do that. And they also basically write that statement of support my mentors. Now, I understand mentors are busy. You might be writing that statement of support for them, and I've certainly seen that. But they should definitely have, some involvement in developing that and making sure that it's all in sync with the collection of mentors. So writing K99s. So some basic tips to just write K awards in general, right? Just not even K99s, but just K awards in general, okay? You really need to focus on your long-term research agenda as a faculty member, okay? Not just your goals of research. So F32, you could be focusing on just your goals, just sort of long-term research goals in general. Here, you want to focus on your long-term goals and agenda as a faculty member, okay? Because the RO phase has to be somewhere else where you are being a faculty member, okay? Plan early to prepare for the proposal, communicate with your grants admin early to discuss the budget, review successful grants, getting feedback from others, even peers for that matter, would be good. Our office can also help with that. Definitely communicate with your program officer. And there's two guidelines. The toolkit that you're going to be given is informed by two things. One is the Forms F guidelines, as well as the parent announcements. I'm not focusing on the RFAs, but I am the toolkit is based on the parent announcements and the Forms F. Okay, so for the presentation today, I'm only going to be focusing. You see that there's a lot of documents that you're going to need to prepare for the K99. And for today, I'm only going to be talking about the ones that are in red. But in the toolkit, you have templates and guidance documents for all of the other, all of the sections. So the introduction only happens if you're doing a resubmission, okay? And you're allowed one resubmission per unfunded new submission, okay? And you know, when you get an original submission, you do original and you get critiques back, and you want to resubmit based on those critiques, you have to respond to all the critiques in this introduction. You may not respond to all the critiques in your resubmission application because maybe some of the critiques may not be totally applicable, or you know, that would really deviate from what you want to do, but you want to address all of the critiques in the introduction, even saying very politely that you know, this was an important point, but for the resubmission we're focusing, you know, nicely saying that we're focusing you know, in this direction. And so anyway, I just want to make sure that that is clear. Okay, so one of the first main sections of the K99 is what's called the candidate section. Okay, the candidate, this is important to note. Okay, the candidate section plus the research strategy of the research plan, and I'll talk about that later. But the candidate section plus the research strategy of the research plan equals 12 pages. Okay, even though these are in separate documents. Okay, and the candidate section, and sometimes it, you know, also it's known as, and you'll see this in the both the Forms F as well as the parent announcement. It's also called a big name, Candidate Information and Goals for Career Development. And in this section, there's 3 required subsections. And so I'm giving also some suggested links within that. So there's the candidate's background, career goals and objectives, and the candidate's plan for career development training activities during award period. So that's a mouthful, but that is one of the sections that you need to have. For the candidate section total, I'm suggesting about 5 to 6 pages. You don't want to shortchange this section, okay? And so what I'm suggesting is that it should be equal or maybe 1 page less than your research strategy, okay? Because you'll see in the review criteria, this is given a lot of weight. All right, so I'm going to, candidate section is broken down into those 3 subsections. So I'm going to go through these 3 subsections in a little bit more detail. And you will see in the toolkit that I have a guidance document and template that sort of organizes it based on these subsections. So in this background section, you want to summarize all of your relevant research. That could be basic, clinical, social behavioral experience, past to current. Okay, and for each research experience, I would include, you know, some of those sub bullets, and it should be very, you know, like using I, you know, first person, you know, it should be very, very engaging and talking about your experience. Don't make it a laundry list, basically. You want to conclude with a paragraph of your potential to develop into a successful independent investigator, okay? Because remember that 1 or 2 years of training, okay, you need to be ready to be a full-time tenure-track faculty member. career goals and objectives. So you want to identify your long-term goal, your research agenda, identify any short-term career goals relating to how this K99 ROO, so both the K99 phase, the RO phase, will help you achieve your long-term research agenda. Justify your need for the career award. And so again, oftentimes, if you are a PhD scientist postdoc, you might have already had some postdoc training. So you really need to identify, okay, how is this K99 addressing some of those challenges and deficits that you haven't yet had in your postdoctoral training, okay? And so, and it needs to be just 1 or 2 years worth, right? If you're a physician scientist and you're coming into a K99, so you may not have had that post PhD scientist or research training like the PhD scientists. So you can come in and say, well, I need more research experience. Okay, I need more research training. I've done a lot of clinical training, but I need more research training in this particular area, beyond maybe what your research, like the clinical fellowship research that you were doing there. And so just remember that the scope of additional training needs has to be 1 to 2 years. So career development training activity section. So whatever challenges and deficits that you described in this last section, that will be the focus. Basically, you're going to focus and expound on that in this section. Identify your training objectives to help achieve the specific aims of your research plan. And for each training objective, you want to describe the mentors involved, how they will help you, any prior collaborations with them. I'd mentioned that before. Describe the new or enhanced research skills and knowledge that you're going to be focusing on, and indicate the percentage of time that you're going to dedicate to each activity by year. Okay, so you have 2 years, so by year, the percentage of time that you're going to dedicate. You need to express these in person months. Okay. Provide a timeline here. I think that's a nice visual. And then sometimes it's useful to connect your K99 aims and to the training activities in terms of when they will be completed. I think that's a nice touch within the timeline. And conclude with explaining how training in these areas during the K99 phase will enhance your research productivity in the ROO phase, which is completely independent. And here are just some examples of training activities that you could focus on in that section. Okay, so courses, experiential, any kinds of conferences or seminars that you want to go to, professional development types of things. All right, so I just spoke about the candidate section and those 3 subsections. So now I'm going to the research plan, which is also another big part of your K99 application. And the research plan includes the specific aims page, the 1-page aims page, and then the research strategy. Okay, and so remember that the research strategy section plus the candidate section from the one I just talked about has to equal 12 pages. Okay, and then the last part of the research plan includes the RCR. How are you going to get RCR? In the K99 phase, and that is 1 page. So research plan basics. I've already mentioned this before, but you want to make sure that your research is aligned with strategic priorities of the specific IC that you're interested in. Also remember that mentored K awards in general, whether it's a K99 or otherwise, I mean, in general, they provide limited funding for the research. Really, the K awards are funding your salary needs, your effort, and so there's less funding for the actual research. So you want to make sure that your research plan is just feasible, to do with that funding. And you want to make sure you're using your mentors resources, but also if you're uh, supporting some of your research with your own funding, you need to understand you can't ask for a piece of equipment or something like that. So anyway, that gives you a sense. The other thing to also note is that if you are responding to the clinical trial only, particularly the clinical trial only PA, the parent, applicants are expected to be proposing, so you can propose to lead an investigation of an independent clinical trial. That's different than the F-32. You can do this, okay? But anyway, because of the research, what am I trying to say? The research limitations, you still will need to use some of the resources of your mentors, to help you with leading that independent clinical trial. The aims page, it's the most non-technical section. You're writing this section for all study section members. And basically the framework, the roughly 4 sections, is based on a tool that I use today. Even today, it's on how to write specific aims. It's in the toolkit. But basically, like your first section is introducing the problem, and you end with gaps in knowledge. Then the second paragraph is focusing on the long-term goal of your research program, the objective of your K99 research, and the training that you'll achieve. I think that's a nice touch. And then, some rationale of why you're going to focus on it, and that should link back to the gaps. Then you break down your specific aims. I think it's ideal to break it into the K99 versus the ROO aims, and then end a concluding section that's focusing on the expected outcomes if the aims are achieved. And I put it in red. Reviewers may only read this page before scoring your grant. Most of the reviewers, you'll have assigned reviewers that read the whole application, but all reviewers will be reading this one page and may only have read this one page. Okay, so the research strategy is, again, I'm saying about 6 to 7 pages, depending upon how long the candidate section is. Okay. And here are the required subsections. There's a significance section, an innovation section, and then the approach. So remember, with the F-32, there was no innovation section, but here there is an innovation section. So significance, it's very similar. You want to first summarize what is known in the field related to the project, describe the strengths and weaknesses and rigor of prior research. This is focusing on rigor and reproducibility that I'll talk more in the approach section, okay? And then you want to summarize any remaining gaps in the field. And then you want to basically then talk about how the proposed project will advance the science to address those gaps. So that's sort of where I'm suggesting organization. The SF424, or even the parent, they don't go into like, how can you organize the significance? But this is like, basically what I'm showing you here is more best practices that I've learned over time to develop this section. Innovation is focusing on new and different ways of addressing, some NIH relevant problem that is a focus for your project. Okay, and so some examples of new things are challenging existing paradigms, testing novel hypotheses, using newly developed state-of-the-art measurements. And I think also what's a nice touch is you could break it down into conceptual versus technical innovations. Okay, and then here, just like in the significance section, you want to provide context of prior studies or preliminary data, so reviewers are able to clearly understand what makes your project innovative from what has been the status quo to date. Okay, the last section of the research strategy is the approach. And so here are some basics about the approach. The remaining pages make up the approach. Use headings and subheadings to organize this section. Use visuals to supplement the text. Highlight essential points, whether it's bold, italics, underline. I wouldn't overuse these, and be consistent with how you're highlighting essential points. You have to provide sufficient detail, but you don't have a whole lot of space. So, this could take a lot of iterations to get right. And this is where you want to get feedback from your mentors. I have actually worked with K99 applicants in the past who actually have been awarded. And, I can help them with getting really great candidate sections and statement of mentors, and they've gotten ones on those. One is a good score on those sections. But I can only help so far with the approach in terms of helping to organize. But I'm not going to know things like what is the best mouse model to use or something like that. I mean, basically, you really want to get your mentors to make sure to give you sufficient feedback on this before you finalize it. Okay. So the next slide is I'm going to focus on 2 ways to organize the approach depending upon your aims. So if your aims have each aim has distinct set of methods. Okay, then for each aim, you want to have these subsections, right? So an introduction, and you want to identify the rationale for this aim, any summary of the aim's activities, the background preliminary studies for that aim, the methods for that particular aim, and then the expected outcomes, and then potential problems and alternative approaches. Okay, so you would have these subsections for each aim. And so your subsection header would basically be the title of each aim with these subsections, okay? The other way you could do it is when your aims use a common set of methods. So, I see, for example, if your populations, whether it's animal or human populations, are pretty similar, and all you're using is maybe different data analysis or something like that, you could probably go by using the unitary version. Okay, and so here, for all the aims, you would just have the rationale, and then background preliminary studies, and then the methods, and then the where there might be some differentiation, like say, for example, if it's a much more computational type of project, that the data analysis or the data management part, maybe even the study measurements parts, there might be some differentiation there that you could say for aim 1, you would do this, for aim 2, you would do that. And then you would have collectively, you talk about the expected outcomes, potential problems, and alternative approaches. And then collectively, for both types of organization, you have a timeline. So identify the key aim activities that you will do within the 5-year period. Okay, both the mentored aims versus and the ROO aims, and then the future directions is always a nice touch at the end as a concluding section. Okay, so rigor and reproducibility, I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about that. So I've already mentioned in the significance, the rigor and reproducibility element is that you want to have a strong rigor of prior research, okay? And so if you go back to that slide, you'll see where I talk about that. So for the approach, there are three main points that you want to emphasize the rigor and reproducibility. So the first one is describing the scientific rigor, and this focuses on the design of your research, per aim or aims collectively. Okay. The next one is explaining how relevant biological variables such as sex factor into research designs. This is particularly for animal and human subjects types of projects. Okay, you would need to address biological variables. For wet labs versus dry labs are more computational labs. Wet labs, you're doing gel experiments, for example. You want to identify key resources. And you identify them in the approach, but then you include a separate one-page authentication plan to kind of delineate. And the authentication plan oftentimes is boilerplates of the brochures relating to some of these key resources, okay? And how would you integrate this, already into about a 6-page document, right? So you can embed them in the subsections of the method sections and or address them in their own section labeled rigor and reproducibility. And so I'm just going to go through each of those 3 sub-bullets a little bit more. So when I say study design, I'm talking about the type of study design that you're going to be doing for your project, right? And so these are the different types of study designs. NIH considers the experimental study design as the gold standard, but sometimes some projects, it may not warrant doing an experimental study design, and you might have to do, say, a cross-sectional survey or a cohort study. And for those, you would just need to address some of the biases and how you're going to minimize those biases, in your project. And here are just some resources that I identify, that might be helpful to if you want to figure out what might be a good study design for your project if you need them. Biological variables. So I gave you the guidance there, but the decision tool I actually find is a very nice way of even helping you develop language on justifying, for example, whether you're only using male mice, versus both male and female, for example. So they have some good, I think, language that you could actually take from it and use for your justification. Key resources. So key resources, the definition is that they are integral to the proposed research, but they are not being developed as part of the proposed project, okay? So they are not standard laboratory reagents like buffers or any kind of common kinds of chemicals or biologicals used in the lab. They, think of them that they have qualities or qualifications that could influence the research data. Here are some examples: cell lines, specialty chemicals, antibodies, other biologics. Okay, so those are just giving you some examples. And so if you identify the key resources in the approach, and then you supplement that with the one-page authentication plan, in a separate section of your application. And I actually have some examples of authentication plans in the toolkit. Your mentors might also have their own authentication plan examples. So there's a number of ways that you can find to help develop this plan if it's relevant to your research. RCR training. So you need to have a one page focusing on prior and proposed RCR training. So remember the prior as well as the proposed. And the guidance that I have tells you the required 5 components, and I've sub-bulleted there, okay? Those have to be in your RCR. And Duke has the RCR option that meets these requirements. And so I would, take boilerplates from this, the Assist website and, develop this, this page. Okay, I'm going to go now into the third big section that is reviewed for this application. It's the mentor, co-mentors, consultant, collaborator section, and there's two documents. at least one document that you need to prepare and one that might be relevant, okay? So one is the plans and statements of mentors and co-mentors. That has to be 6 pages, up to 6 pages. And then the letters of support from collaborators, contributors, and consultants, okay? That's if it's relevant. That means that if you have individuals who are helping you with your project that are outside of your mentoring team, they need to provide a letter of support here, okay? And you have up to 6 pages for this document. Okay, so plans and statements from mentors. So both the primary mentor and the co-mentors, basically, they can write have their plan separately, or they can, it could be a joint type of statement to develop this document, which has to be 6 pages total. Okay. And actually the parent, as well as the Forms F guidance, is very good about delineating exactly what you need to put in here. And what you'll see in the toolkit is coming exactly from that. And this statement needs to be in complete sync with what is in your candidates plan training activities in the K99 phase. Every mentor or co-mentor, this is also what you need to know, they have to submit a biosketch, okay? So it'll be, your application will need to include your biosketch, as you're the applicant, and then every mentor or co-mentor biosketch, okay? And then this just gives you some, bulleted items of what the plans and statements of mentors needs to include. They need to show their track record, their qualifications, their actual role. I have seen critiques where, unfunded, where they'll say, well, it's not clear what this person is providing in terms of role. You want to make sure that it's very, very clear the specific roles for mentoring that this collective mentoring team is providing you, okay? Some other things to note: components of the K99 research that the candidate can take to the ROO phase. There's some additional information that any clinical trial mentor needs to provide for this plans and statements document, okay? They need to identify the available time that they have. They need to say, kind of reiterating what the candidate has already said in their candidate section, the candidate's time available for research versus other activities. This is particularly important if you're a physician and you're a physician scientist, because the assumption is you'll still be doing some of your physician types of activities, but you really, this needs to show that yes, you are going to have the 75% or higher time to focus on your research for this K99. And then it also should say how mentors will help transition the candidate into the independent phase. The letters of support, like I said, if you have basically advisor, like for example, you might have a faculty advisory team, you might have consultants on your application, and if you have people like this who are not in the mentoring role, they need to give a letter of support, okay? And you have up to 6 pages to provide. Note that these letters are different than your reference letters. I'm not going into this in my presentation today, but there will be a subfolder on reference letters that you're going to need to get 3 to 5 reference letters that are completely separate from this. Okay, biosketches are not needed for these individuals, just these letters of support, and you have up to 6 pages.
Hi, Sohini, this is Molly. I just want to let you know we're at the 45-minute mark.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to rush a little bit. So the other section that they review on is your environmental and institutional commitment to candidate. So this is two documents you need to prepare: description of the institutional environment and the institutional commitment to candidates' research career development. Description of institutional environment, basically, it's a 1-page. You're just expanding upon your facilities and other resources and equipment docs. You're emphasizing your access to resources, maybe journal clubs, ways you're going to interact with people. So make it, just expand upon the facility's other resource equipment docs. Okay, that's one page there. Then you need on, it's a letter, okay? On departmental or on school letterhead signed by the dean or the departmental chairperson. And it's very, very specific what you need to include in this letter, okay? There's a template in the toolkit, and it comes directly from the guidance in the SF 424 and the parent. BioSketch, new format, very important, okay? So if you've had an NIH BioSketch in the past, okay, you need to make sure that it's on the new format. And I have in the toolkit all the new format template sample instruction, okay? And I tell you here what has changed in the new format, okay? The D section mainly is removed entirely from this format. That is a big thing. And then the ongoing and completed research support from past 3 years, you can add to the personal statement section. Here's some information about the NIH BioSketch. I mentioned the most important things just from the last slide. Okay, a little bit more on the BioSketch personal statement. And then here's the scored reviewed criteria, okay? You're gonna be, and this is why I keep on saying that it's like, this is different from an R grant. While an R grant is completely focusing on your research plan, this is focusing on equally candidate, career development plan, and your career goals and objectives, okay? Research plan, your mentors, co-mentors, consultants, collaborators, what I mentioned before, and then the environment and institutional commitment to candidate. All must be strong to be competitive. What do I mean by strong? Scores of 1s, 2s. When you start to borderline in 3s, most likely you're not going to get funded, okay? So you want to have 1s and 2s in each of these areas to be competitive. Here are some, all I do right here is I'm linking the review criteria to the pertinent docs that some of which I just described, okay? As a way of thinking about, the relationship to the criteria and the docs that you need to prepare. Okay, sorry that I got a little, I was a little bit more quick in the last slides, but are there any questions? Yes, Carolyn?
Carolyn, can you hear me?
Oh, Metin, sorry, it's Metin.
Yes.
Sorry,
yes, Metin.
Hi.
Hello. Actually, I have several questions. This was a great presentation. Thank you for that. And there are several great questions on the chat. Actually, I can just ask something, maybe more practical. First, can we get this recording for this presentation? And is there any previous recordings related to K99 awards? And can we email our questions to you to make it, more efficient instead of asking them in here?
Oh yeah, no, you can. Any of you can always follow up with ideally, if for now, because we have so little time, it would be better if you ask questions that are not so specific to you. If it could benefit a lot of people, those are better questions to ask here. But if you have any follow-up questions for me that are more specific to you, please do that.
And for this recording and maybe previous recordings related to K99 awards, do we have the access possibly?
Hi, this is Molly. If you look on the F32 K99 Sites at Duke grant writing series, you will see under previous sessions links to recordings of other workshops. So that is where to look.
Thanks, Molly.
Sure. And Sohini, regarding questions in the chat, we had quite a few questions about, do you really need to switch mentors for K99? Is that a requirement, just a recommendation? Can you keep the same mentor and just have different people on your mentoring committee?
Well, so look at it this way. You've been a postdoc in somebody's lab, and they've been your mentor, okay? And you're maybe this is your scenario. You're saying, oh, why don't you apply for a K99? okay? And you've had this mentor. So you're going to have to justify to NIH, to the IC of interest, why or how this K99 is new training from what you're getting in the lab that you've been in, or with the PI that you've been working with this whole time. So look at it that way. So, am I gonna tell you, no, you cannot do that? Maybe I mean, I think it's better that an NIH program officer tells you that, but I think you need to look at it from that perspective. If you have been with a PI for at least 2 or 3 years, and now you want to apply for a K99, okay, you have to recognize that this has to be new training, and that you are starting to establish research independence. So if you can do that justification, okay, and this is also a really good question to ask the program officer, okay, just say that, and maybe you have a good way of justifying that you can stay in the same lab, stay with the same person, but still get new, go on a new direction, okay, but you're going to have to start thinking about that justification for yourself. Does that help?
If anyone has comments, please jump in, or questions.
I can just ask one question related to that then. So is it good, like, keep working with the same PI, and then maybe adding different commenters to justify that will be a new training? Would it work, or no effect?
Well, would it work? You're going to need to justify why you want to keep the same primary mentor. I do think that there might be some need for that, but again, I think it's better. I think it's better to have this conversation with the program officer to be really clear. You want to be clear before you start writing this. It's a lot of investment to write this the K99 RO, like any NIH application for that matter. But I really think that having answers to these questions and figuring out the justification as part of your narrative is going to be really, really important early on.
Hi, this is Aditi. I wanted to follow up on that question. Is there some kind of a limit up to how many mentors and co-mentors you can have for the study?
Oh, there's no limit. I would look at it from, again, think about the project, think about your research independence, think about the types of training you want, and make sure that you have, good people, good track record that are on this team. Now, remember that they don't all have to be at Duke, especially when you start getting into co-mentors, right? You could find people, other places. So, as long as they have, like I said, a good track record, ideally NIH, but yeah, and a good mentoring record. So I think that those things are important, right? So there's no limit on how many people you have. And like I said, even beyond the co-mentoring team, you could have people who are, say, for example, you might have a faculty advisory panel, right? So they're providing some specific guidance, but they're not going to be the mentors that, as you see from what I presented today, they have to demonstrate on paper some pretty strong commitment to you. So maybe there might be some advisors that you will get some guidance from, but maybe not as much commitment. So those are people that maybe could be a part of, like, say like advisory committee or something like that.
Thanks, Sohini. That helps.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Hi, Sohini. I'm Mubashir. I have a question regarding, like, for example, if you get accepted for this K99 award, do you have to be like keeping that same timeline as you promised? Like, for example, if someone get a academic position within 1 year of the acceptance of this award, can they move towards the independent career phase, or does he or she has to continue this mentor phase for, for example, 2 years or something?
Oh, so that's a great question, and I think that those are the things that can be negotiated. I helped somebody. This is when I was at UNC, and I helped someone with a K99, and they already had a even at the time of application, they already they were interviewing at a place, and the person was interested. And actually, applying for a K99, even saying that you got one is actually very good, for marketability. So this place was so interested in the person that they said, sure, go ahead and do your K99 back at UNC, and then come after the 2 years. And so, like, basically they had a faculty position sort of already in the bag, but the university allowed them to stay to finish the K99. So I think that there's a lot of flexibility with that. Now, in the institutional commitment letter, though, I wouldn't say something like, oh yeah, planning on, if you're at Duke, planning on staying at Duke. I think that what it needs to say is that, the mentors and the department is going to do whatever it takes to help you, get the, get a faculty position. And you might already have some ideas yourself, so you could also, contribute into that letter relating to that. I think there's a lot of flexibility with that. What I have heard, though, after people have received a K99 and then they go over to the tenure-track position, there are some complications that people have had relating to getting the, not so much getting the RO funding, but getting it, the transfer and all that. But that's sort of beyond this presentation. And I don't think that that's exactly what you're talking about. I think at the application phase, it's there's just a lot of flexibility if you want to curtail the mentoring part. And again, I think it's an amendment. It's an amendment to your aims and things like that. So yes, I think that's very, very doable.
Thank you.
We have time for probably one more question. I also want to let everyone know that the link to Sohini's toolkits were posted in the chat. You can also just find those by Googling Duke OCRD, Office for Campus Research Development, and then looking under toolkits. Also look at the Office of Research Support for funding tools. We are recording this, so if the recording works, it will be posted on the K99 F32 website.
Let me say one thing about that, Molly, before I'm going to add a couple of things to that. So if you actually download it now, it won't have this presentation. I want to put this presentation on there and delete last year's presentation. So I'm also happy to follow up with this when the toolkit is ready. I'll do that sometime today. Okay, sorry.
Great, and I will be sending Sohini the list of people who attended. So again, Sohini has very generously offered, if you have any questions, contact her, and she will be in touch with you with the updated website or toolkit.
I would love to pose one last question. I'm just curious, for research that relies on external partners, what level of documentation do you need for that research partnership, and in terms of commitment from that partner?
And this partner is, it wouldn't be a mentor. It would be like some kind of collaborator, you're thinking?
It would be a community-based partner, like for example, a law enforcement agency.
Yeah, I would, so again, remember this is a little bit different than an R. I would say that that's a really, yeah, the person would write a letter of support. And so in this case, they can write a letter of support, but I would frame it, I would frame it like from a training perspective. So I would say something like, this person or this agency is going to provide you, X, Y, or Z, types of resources to help with your project. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right, everyone, if there are no further questions, we have reached the end of our workshop. Let's all give Sohini a big round of virtual applause. Thank you so much, Sohini, for giving us this great presentation. And Sohini will be in touch. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the day.